Hi, everyone, and welcome to MedEdge. I'm Marcus Grimm. Before we get started, quick reminder that MedEdge is brought to you by Medtrics. Medtrics is a proven student, resident, and faculty engagement platform for both UME and GME. You can learn more about Medtrics at medtricslab.com or from my frequent co-host, Medtrics CEO Santosh Cherian. But not today. Tosh is on a client call. I have to keep those clients happy. On MedEdge, we love to talk to physicians of all types and backgrounds, representing a wide variety of specialties, each with a unique story to tell. And today's guest is Dr. Heather Moday. How's this for a bio? Dr. Heather Moday is a board-certified allergist, immunologist, and functional medicine physician. She's the author of The Immunotype Breakthrough, your personalized plan to balance your immune system, optimize health, and build lifelong resilience. If her name sounds familiar to you, well, it should. Dr. Moday has been on the Jillian Michaels podcast. She's been live with Kelly and Ryan. She's done a great job with marketing. We're going to be talking about that today. But I think she summarizes her story really well in a recent post from her Instagram account. By the way, check out that account as well. It's Dr. Moday on Instagram, and she has over 100,000 followers. And here's the quote. I went to medical school at 25 and dedicated the next 9 years to school, residency, and fellowship with the intention to help people be healthier. I worked for 10 years in an unfulfilling job, prescribing tons of steroids and antibiotics and other drugs, not asking patients anything about their real health. I quit my job at 43 to study integrative and functional medicine, and now spend my time helping people at midlife be the best version of themselves. What a great mission statement. Hasn't always been easy. At 54, I'm still learning too, as we all are. Dr. Heather Moday, welcome to MedEdge.
Thanks, Marcus. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start off with a logistics question. Tosh and the Medtrics team, they're all based in Philadelphia. And my understanding is you spent quite a few years in Philadelphia too, right?
I did. Philadelphia was my first stop after my residency and fellowship, which I completed in New York City. And so, yes, that was my first job as a allergist in a private practice there. And I was there, for... I'm going to say close to 18 years. It's sort of hard to know, but I love Philly. I live downtown. I think it's a great city. So yeah, I miss it.
And these days you said Norfolk, Virginia's your home now, right?
I am in Norfolk, Virginia. So about 5 hours south of Philly. Very different pace of life, but also has its perks too.
Sure. You don't have to deal with the school, right?
That is true. I do not have to deal with the school.
So I listened to another podcast that we always like to ask the origin stories because how people come to healthcare is always pretty amazing to me. And you mentioned that when you were younger, you had some aspirations of being a veterinarian. Tell us what started that and how you started on that as your perhaps career that you didn't take.
Yeah, I think I was a kid who liked to play in the dirt a lot. I was the kid who was always, saving caterpillars, and my mom was allergic to cats, and so was my sister, but I loved cats, and I was always the one who was picking them up. And, I think I just had a real affinity to sort of the natural world. I was a biology major in college, and, I wasn't really sure I didn't have these aspirations of, some kids like I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up. And I got to college and I wasn't really sure, quite honestly. And I spent the first couple of years after college actually in a research lab at Rockefeller University in New York City. And I realized at that point that as much as I thought research was interesting, I didn't want to be stuck in a lab and I wanted to be working with people. And I always loved animals, but I think I'm just too close to them. I thought, I don't know if I could handle, the death. Not that I can really handle death of humans, but, I just felt, I don't know. I think I would cry every day if I had to, I just have a real soft spot for animals. So that I decided not to go that route.
Well, I think I'm sorry for the animals. It's probably great news for your patients. Let's talk a little bit as we record this. We're about a month past match day, which is just a huge big day for a lot of people that listen to this show. UME students find out where they're going to be residents, and it's a life-changing day. Now Tosh, who is the CEO of Medtrics, he's also a practicing physician radiologist, and he likes to hear these match day stories, but match day has changed since you went through it, since Tosh went through it. What do you recall about the match day process and what that was like for you? Was allergist the one specialty that you went after? Was it one of three? What do you remember about match day?
So I knew that I wanted to do internal medicine. I wasn't sure at that point that I wanted to specialize, but I knew I didn't want to be a surgeon. I didn't want to do obstetrics and gynecology. I didn't want to do pediatrics. And I really liked I liked my rotations in medicine. I thought they were very interesting. It was very varied. And so I knew that was the sort of the general specialty I wanted to do. And I think that match day was rather, I don't want to say anxiety provoking, but I think it's still that way too, right? And I was trying to be geographically in New York. I probably would have decided to go somewhere different, if I had to go back and do it all over again. But, it's an important day. I mean, it's something that I think that, it can set really a trajectory for your life. And so I think it's something that, not to make it even more stressful than it is, but I think it's really important to be mindful about where you go in terms of, is it the right fit for you, whether it's a big city hospital or small community hospital or geographically. I just remember it being a relief too, once you sort of know where you're going, and celebratory, obviously, for some people. It's interesting. I think that, not a lot of other, besides maybe the military, do you have that kind of, protocol that here's where you're going to be for the next 3 to 5 years of your life.
Let me ask you this question. It's interesting. We've actually, as part of our MedEdge Future series, we've actually been, introducing some, new residents, people who just went through the match day process, and we've completed a few of these interviews. And one of the new residents applied to 3 programs, and the other one applied to 70. So there's a real gap there. Were you more of the 3, or were you more of the 70? And of course, I'm assuming back then it probably wasn't all online. So 70 would have been I can't even imagine preparing 70 applications.
Yeah, I don't think anybody applied to things like that unless they wanted to be a neurosurgeon and just wanted to make sure they got in somewhere. Internal medicine obviously is one of the more common residencies, and most of the time you're going to end up in some residency that's, that you're okay with. I mean, if you want to get into a very specific, extremely competitive one, then it's a little bit harder. But I think I probably applied to 6 or 7, because I definitely wanted to sort of be on the East Coast. I was actually going to school in the South at the time.
Oh, okay.
Which was wonderful. I had a wonderful medical school experience, very different than my residency experience. But I made that decision. And so I sort of only had a few that I was interested in going to.
So you finished residency in 2003 and immediately went to work for a large private practice in Philadelphia, where you stayed for nearly a dozen years.
Mm-hmm. Towards
the end of that time, you went back to school to become board certified in integrative and holistic medicine. Talk to us, that's a big moment in your career. And I'm sure it was a series of events that took place over a period of time. But what was that time period like? How did you kind of go through saying, okay, I've done this? What I find interesting about your story is that sometimes people get into something and within 6 months they're like, this isn't for me. But you did it. You did it for 12 years and still at the end of those 12 years said, no, I'm going to choose another path. What can you share with us about that story?
I did a fellowship, right after my residency in allergy and immunology. And because I realized through my 3 years of residency that I was not cut out to be a generalist. I definitely wasn't.
Well, let me stop you right there. Why was that?
I just knew that I didn't care for the primary care clinic setting. It just wasn't my thing. And there was just certain aspects of internal medicine that fascinated me more. So in particular, I was sort of going between rheumatology and allergy and immunology, sort of in that area. And so I ended up being very lucky in getting a spot at the institution I was in New York City. I had done a rotation the director of the allergy and immunology department really liked me and said, "Hey, I think you're a great candidate. Basically, do you want to start next year?" I mean, I didn't really have to do anything. So I thought, okay, well, this is great. So I did it. I did enjoy it. And so when I ended up as an allergist, the first few years I was just, and this is, I think people, just to put this in perspective. So I started in 2003 down there, and we are, 21 years later. So this is before social media. This is before smartphones.
Right.
This is before doctors were taught about business or marketing, or quite honestly, you were just happy to get a job. Like, there was none of this. There wasn't a lot of negotiations. People weren't talking on Reddit and whatever about like, hey, what's the best thing to do? So, I mean, you really were just put on this track of like, okay, here's a job and you're going to stick with it and you're just going to do what you're told. And so that's what I did. And what I realized is after a few years is, the practice itself, although it was a successful practice, some of the leadership was not particularly, let's say, just supportive or warm.
Right.
And I was concerned that I was not going to be moving forward in terms of like how I wanted to, eventually be. And I also think that, at this time, this was before there was a lot of interesting developments in the immunologic field. I mean, now it's like insane, right? So just to give people perspective, when I was around the time I was leaving, maybe a couple of years before, so maybe 2008 or so, I probably have this wrong, but, one of the first monoclonal antibodies was coming out in the allergy field, which is called Xolair, right? So we were starting to use that, but really up until that point, it was, antihistamines and nasal steroids and antibiotics. And it was very sort of, quite honestly, it was a little boring. And I was really interested in learning more. I'm always very curious. I just wanted to do more and learn more. And I think there were a couple things that were going on at that time. One of the physicians who I worked very closely with developed a disease which caused him to retire. And so I had to take on his entire load of patients, and it was very stressful. And I think I myself was getting a little bored. So I kept asking questions of my patients, like, they would come in with hives, the diagnosis that no one wants to deal with, chronic hives. That's what allergists, they roll their eyes about that, but I'd want to find out, well, what triggered the hives? Could it be a food sensitivity? Could it be stress? Could it be all this kind of stuff? And so I was sort of going down the rabbit hole myself as much as I could at that point in time. And I started to read and got interested in this concept called integrative medicine, which was sort of coined by Dr. Andrew Weil, who had started a fellowship in Arizona. And so on one of my breaks, I went to a conference in integrative medicine, and I thought, well, this is really cool. And I found out there was a fellowship, but I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I had to pay for it myself. And it's not like I took time off of work. It was all online, and you had to fly down there a couple times a year. But I did that over 2 years and learned so much. And then when I came back, I thought, how could I apply this to what I do? And I actually could have, but the practice I was in was not one really that was amenable to that. So at that point, I had to make the decision, well, what am I going to do with this? And, maybe bravely or stupidly at that time, I was like, oh, I'll just open my own practice. And I knew nothing, absolutely zero about starting a practice, or, really anything business wise, because that was not something that I had ever been taught.
I'm curious. You mentioned that the practice you were at, it wasn't amenable to going there. Was this so new that there weren't other practices that you could have gone to work for?
So it was pretty sparse. I mean, again, this was around, I guess I finally left around 2014 or 2013. So yeah, maybe 2011, 2012. There wasn't a ton. I mean, there were a few integrative medicine practices. Functional medicine, which is a little bit different, was also just sort of taking off. You know, I didn't know, I thought, what am I going to do? Am I going to move? I'm going to have to move across the country. You know, I had a house and friends, and I thought, I guess in the moment it was less risky for me to quit my job and, you know, take out a business loan and start this practice. But, you know, in hindsight, yes, maybe it would have been a good idea to look around and see if I could go work for someone for a while, but I didn't. So I just I jumped into the fire feet first. But yeah, I think now it's, there's many, many, many more practices. I mean, it's just absolutely exploded.
I think that's fascinating how like timing's always super contextual, right? So if all of this would have happened to you maybe 10 years later, maybe you don't open up your practice. Maybe there's other places.
Exactly. It might have been very, very different at the time. Yeah.
Right. This path that you're seeing now, this path that you've taken, do you feel, are you seeing that? You go to conferences, you talk to other physicians. Do you think this path, this road less traveled that you're on, is it more common today? Are you seeing more of it, or are you just seeing now that the practices are more welcoming to other approaches?
No, I mean, I think it's exploded. Like when I went to the Institute for Functional Medicine is probably the largest and most, I'm going to say well-established training, I'm going to say institution, right? Everything was in person. You had to fly literally around the country to go to these on-site meetings and then finish all 7 of them and then do all this other stuff. Right now, there's so many people that are doing it that everything's virtual. And I mean, I think that the population of not only physicians, but nurse practitioners and nutritionists, and they have all different tracks, that so many people are doing this now. I think it's really, immensely increased. And I think it's going to continue. I really do. I don't think there's certainly not an end to traditional conventional medicine. I mean, obviously we're going through some major changes, in many, many different areas, but there's obviously always, I am so proud and, grateful that I had the training that I had. It was very rigorous. And I think that has helped me because as we know, as everyone is out there in social media land knows, there's a ton of misinformation. A lot of it is very dangerous. There is a lack of responsibility on the part of many people that are giving advice because they, legally they're not bound to really anything. And, I am still a person who took the Hippocratic Oath. I retain malpractice insurance. I have a license. And I have to be very careful about doing due diligence and even in just giving education out online. So I have tremendous respect for that. And I actually think that's why there should be more physicians and traditionally trained practitioners looking into, something like integrative medicine or functional medicine. And it was really great when I first did my integrative medicine fellowship, just to tell you, I went down and you're in these cohorts. And there's other training institutions now, but the Andrew Weil Center is really was the first. And I met doctors from every background. I mean, it was like we had radiologists, we had surgeons, pediatricians, oncologists, psychiatrists. It was so interesting to hear their stories as to why they ended up there and what they were looking for in their development. Some of them were even retired. They were just doing this because they wanted to learn more or maybe start a new business. I mean, it was just really, really interesting. You
talked about the fact that a lot of the learning from the fellowship was online. I don't want to stereotype it, but it also sounds like when we talk to people that are going the traditional route, it seems it's very career driven. Here, this is very curiosity driven. Mm-hmm. How else was the fellowship different from your traditional med school learning?
Well, I mean, everything really. First of all, you're not taking tons of tests, right? It's very self-directed. In the end, you do have to take a very rigorous exam, quite honestly. But it's up to you. I mean, you're the one who's paying for it. And you're doing this because you have a love of knowledge and you want to better yourself and your practice. And the thing about integrative medicine, it's really what it means. It's integrating, I would say traditional or, conventional medicine, right? With less, let's just say conventional practices. And so you're learning more about, the mind-body sort of connection. You might be learning a little bit about other things. You're not going to become a master in acupuncture. I mean, that could take years, right? But you're learning, okay, so what is homeopathy and what it might be beneficial for? What does Eastern Asian medicine help? You learn a ton about nutrition, meditation, stress reduction, all this kind of stuff that can really augment anyone's practice as a traditional physician. So you could be a pediatrician or a general practitioner and take all this knowledge and really help your patients. So I think the difference is that that's what we focused on, because all of us were coming there with a different background, but solid sort of science and understanding of the science.
Mm-hmm. It's a great answer. Now let's talk about, and you mentioned this too, the when you took the leap and opened up your own practice. And of course, one of the things that I often see in scenarios like this is, yes, this is all exciting. You're opening up your new business, but because you're in a business where you're now not taking health insurance, you're now moving into this. But before, every other traditional doctor that we would talk to, they would say, my schedule is full. I have more than enough patients. Now, suddenly, though, you also have to build a business, and so you're responsible for your own marketing, your own pipeline of revenue, if you will. How did was that part easy for you? Or was that part hard? It's great that you're a pathologically curious person. That's what I always say to Tosh, my co-host. But how did you prepare for that part, or did that come natural to you?
I think I wasn't prepared, quite honestly. At that point, people still were relying a lot upon print media, quite honestly. I mean, there was some out there, obviously Facebook and things like that was still very small, but we didn't really have a lot of that going on. So, basically website, blogging. At that point, I was doing just primarily work in, the Philadelphia and the surrounding area. And so, some networking. One thing that I did do, which has really helped me in the end, was I started doing talks. I started doing health talks in my office to bring patients in, because you're right, you couldn't find me on an insurance list. I was one of the first functional medicine, probably I think the first functional medicine physician in Philadelphia. So it was very easy to find me on, even back then, on Google. Or whatever search engine people were using. And so I did, that was really helpful. And that also helped me because I would do 2 talks a month, and I probably did that for 3 years or so, maybe even longer. So that helped me hone my story. It made me very comfortable with giving, talks and explaining things to people. And, so that was helpful. I did join a coaching program at some point, which was also helpful. At that, people were starting to do some business coaching for doctors. And it's just along the way, you just start picking things up. And, now it's a little overwhelming because there's so many things that, that you can do. So you have to sort of keep your blinders on. But I think a lot of it was just literally making mistakes and trying things out and seeing what stuck. And I can't say I really had a strategy when I started, quite honestly. Yeah.
Let me ask you this question. When we had Dr. Daniel Paul on, one of the first orthopedists in America to go direct pay, he was interesting because obviously in orthopedics, he could have gone the traditional insurance payment route, and he's intentionally said, I don't want to go that route. I think the system is bloated. I don't want to hire staff who are just in charge of trying to get paid. I'm curious, are you seeing trends? Do you think that 5 years down the road, you could bill insurance more. Would you have any interest in doing so? I'm just curious how you think about insurance as it relates to how you're building your practice.
So the problem with insurance in the kind of medicine that integrative medicine, functional medicine is that you would never be able to, you wouldn't survive, quite honestly. Because the thing is my average intake for a patient is an hour long. My follow-ups can be 45 minutes, an hour long. Many of the tests, not all, some of the tests I use are within network, but some are outside of network. We also utilize nutrition visits, health coaching. A lot of these things are not really, they may not be reimbursed. And quite honestly, in a micro practice like mine is, I can't wait 4 months to get paid. I also can't hire a biller and all this staff to do, this upper level stuff. So it really doesn't work, because the type of training, like we talk about, we really dive into people's details of their habits and their underlying issues. And it's just not really supported by, as I know, when I was an allergist, I would see I don't know, maybe 6 patients an hour or something like that. I see 5 patients a day, 6 patients a day. So it's really not amenable to that, unfortunately.
Right. So let's stay on that being the case then. So as we can see here, you're always going to be responsible for finding your next patient. So marketing is key. So let's talk about your book, the Immunotype Breakthrough. Tons of reviews on Amazon, and I'm curious when you did that. Now today there are many people that talk about content forward businesses, that you want to have this tentpole product. But we've also learned about you that you're just a really curious person. I'm curious, when you wrote that book, were you simply trying to distill sort of how you were thinking about medicine, or was there a big part of you that said, you know what, I do want to have this tentpole so people can see what I believe in?
I would say it's probably the former. I think I always wanted to write a book, but it wasn't, I know some practitioners or just people out there in general are like, oh, I want to write a book because this is something that's going to promote my business. And that was not at all what I thought. I thought, wouldn't it be great if it improved my business or put me out there a little bit? But it really came out of, I was at a meeting in Arizona at this organization called Mind Body Green. They're a very well-known online platform for health and wellness. And so I was there and it was really sort of serendipitous. I met a woman who was a book agent. And this is literally the year before COVID came out. So this is 2019, and we're chatting. And she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm an allergist, immunologist." And I had been invited there because at that point I was posting a lot on Instagram, and I was bringing up, I was talking about what I believed in and all this kind of stuff. And so they had interviewed me on their podcast, and they invited me down. And so I meet this book agent, and she said, we kept bumping into each other, and she said, "You should really think about writing a book." And she said, "There's not a lot of, I don't know of any immunologists or many that are also functional medicine and blah, blah, blah." And I was seeing a lot of autoimmune disease and stuff at the time. So I thought about it, and sort of it simmered and simmered. And then what was really interesting, we went back and forth, thinking about how I was going to write this book. And then it was literally COVID happened. And she said, "Oh my God, Heather, we really need to get something out." So I think I wrote the manuscript in about, or at least the intro in about 4, 5, 6 weeks. And then we shopped it around to some publishers, and it got picked up in 2020, in the summer of 2020. So, and then of course I had to write the book.
Right.
So I spent the next, I guess the next year, they had a very tight deadline, pretty much to write this book. But I would say at that point, it was not like, oh, I'm going to do this because this is going to expand my brand. I was hoping that, as it was going to open up some doors, really more, I really just wanted to meet more people, make more connections. I love doing this sort of educational stuff. And it was great because I was able to do a ton of podcasts. I wrote a bunch of articles. And that is, I think, a lot of what I like about medicine is sort of the education part. And so it fulfilled that for me. It was a real learning experience. I think anyone, if you're forced to write a book, you learn a lot. You learn a lot.
and then it obviously did open some doors for you. You had the opportunity to meet Ryan Seacrest. When you think about some of those fortuitous moments, but I would also say, when we talk about luck and good fortune, we always talk about increasing somebody's luck surface. And what I hear is you had the book, you were doing the talks, you were doing Instagram. So I almost get the sense that you're putting a lot of signals out there into the market, which I think is critical, right? Because you don't know which is going to hit.
Exactly. And I think one of my driving, and this is still one of my driving forces, again, it goes back to that idea of misinformation, which of course exploded during COVID. I am not a controversial sort of political person at all, but I have a very high moral, ethical bar. And so one of my goals is to, approach this, sort of spread of information in a very balanced way. I feel very strongly about that, people are allowed to have their opinions, but you have to say it's an opinion. And I think a lot of people just don't do that because they're not required. They don't have, there's nobody's going to come knock on their door and take their license away if they say something, that is damaging. So I feel very strongly about that. And so even when I post, I really try to have, an open mind and try to, talk about things in a more balanced way. And so that's really my thing. Whereas I think a lot of people, when they're getting out, doing a lot of social media, they're trying to build a platform. And to do that, they are taking extremes of opinions. They're being very dramatic. And that is not me. So, maybe I could have a bigger platform, but that goes against every, sort of bone in my body. So.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of the hype and a lot of the buzz these days comes from the edges, and it seems like you're more of a centrist saying, hey, listen, some of these ideas here, let's just see if we can shift them over and get more people exposed to them. So here's a real tough question for you. You now live in this other medicine world, which it's not the same as traditional functional medicine. What are some of the big themes or big ideas that if you could wave a magic wand, you would say, you know what, it would be great if in traditional medicine, here are some topics, here are some themes that we really push over on the integrated side that I just don't see down over on the traditional side. Are there some overwhelming themes there that you're like, wow, why don't we just make that part of curriculum?
Gosh, that would be a really long list, but yes, I'll tell you. This is like, like I said, I love education, and I would love to talk to medical schools about this because, I went to a wonderful medical school and I really appreciated the education I got there. But I would say one thing, and a lot of people do talk about this now, that needs to be pushed into traditional medical school education is the importance of nutrition. And, it's out there, but even the nutrition knowledge, like if you read a typical article, a lot of it is really antiquated data. I mean, they're talking about guidelines that were written 20, 25 years ago. And I would say that the one thing that I would say that I do now that I didn't do really when I was a traditional physician is I wasn't going into PubMed. I mean, I'm in PubMed all the time. I'm constantly reading about new developments and what's going on. And I have nothing against pharmaceuticals. I think pharmaceuticals are really, really important. That is, I make that stand because it's true. But lifestyle needs to balance that. And right now, I mean, I think when I was an allergist, all I did was go to conferences and really just learn about new drugs, which is great. But I was a physician. I wasn't working for pharma. I was working as a physician, and I needed to see both sides. And so, and a lot of the frustrations I hear from patients that come in is I ask my doctor, you know, should I change my diet for whatever thing they're going through? And they're told, oh, well, I don't know, or no, it's not going to help you. That it doesn't matter what you eat. I mean, that is the most, like, literally, you need to retire if that's what you're saying to your patients. It's time for you to go home, because we know that's not true. We know that there's a plethora of data, whether you're dealing with heart disease, autoimmune disease, cognitive decline, that nutrition is important. So that's number one for sure. The other thing that's near and dear to my heart is the effects of stress, childhood trauma, just all of those things, relationships, like how you manage stress, how that impacts development of disease, but also can prevent. And we have reams of data going back decades, looking at everything from cancer to heart disease, to depression, anxiety, to IBS. I mean, it's so clear. And, you know, I'm not saying every physician needs to go out there and become like a yogi or something, but it doesn't take much to learn about it, or to at least give resources to your patients to say, listen, we know that, you know, being in a state of fight or flight and high cortisol levels for long periods of time can really start to impact our immune system, which can impact a lot of diseases. So that, I would say those two are just, you know, and I'll throw in the microbiome, but you could go down like a rabbit hole for that one. But, you know, it's all out there, and it's so interesting. It's so fascinating to learn about. And that's what keeps me engaged, is this sort of constant ability to learn more, to help people, to talk about it, to write about it. I just think it's like, I'm never bored, ever.
Right. I think that's tremendous advice. And, you know, I think, you know, certainly we see that in medicine, and quite frankly, we see it everywhere. You know, it's interesting, and I'll share a non-medical story. I was a marketing major. My son was a marketing major, and it was amazing to me, even in his education, just how much of it was not. I mean, times are changing, and studies are being published all the time, and it's tough. It's tough for the education community to keep up with all that, but certainly there's a responsibility to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been a fun conversation. We've talked about your book, available wherever people get books. You're on Instagram. How else can people learn more about you?
Those are two of the best ways. I'm also on LinkedIn, and building my platform there, because I do have an interest in reaching out to more people in the medical community and pharma, in, you know, medical education, because it's a passion of mine. Because I do think that we can all learn from each other. Like, I never really liked this idea of like, we're all in these different like pockets. Like, why don't we all help each other? Why don't we support each other? Like, you know, I never really understood that. So, you can find me on LinkedIn, and that's probably it. I think that keeps me pretty busy between all that.
I bet. Well, Dr. Heather Moday, we started by introducing you as an integrated practitioner, and you finished by saying, well, let's all integrate. Let's talk more. Let's communicate more. Heather, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity.
All right, I'm going to take it out of here, folks. You know, for many, medical school and residency are the capstone of their education. Today's residents will join private practice and have fulfilling careers within the health system as we know it. But for others, it's merely the beginning, setting the stage for alternative career paths through authorship in functional medicine, like today's guest. Dr. Heather Moday is a board-certified physician, a certified functional medicine practitioner, and the founder of the Moday Center, where she and her virtual team serve patients wherever they are. You can learn more at modaycenter.com. You've been watching MedEdge. MedEdge is brought to you by Medtrics. My name is Marcus Grimm, and for Santosh Cherry and everyone on the MedEdge team, have a great day.